Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Joining me, as always, on Thursday mornings now is Dwayne Generalissimo Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show. And Dwayne, nothing's going on. We've got 30 minutes to fill, and my goodness, absolutely nothing's going on, Dwayne. How do you guys do it on the Hugh Hewitt Show?
I think we talked about that last night to open up the after show. I think I said there was nothing going on. I have no idea how we're going to fill the time, but glad that you were along because you can help fill time better than anybody else I know. It's kind of remarkable what's going on in the news right now. I mean, set aside the foreign policy stuff, which nobody here cares about because we're not in war yet, but you look at the domestic intrigue around the Supreme Court nomination, or you look at the inflation numbers, or you look at how Joe Biden is comporting himself in some of the polling. I know we're going to talk about John Harris, our friend over at Politico, who seems to long for the days where we had kind of a sparky foul-mouthed president. It's just all sorts of fun stuff to be had today.
Yeah, all sorts of fun stuff. And of course the Supreme Court nomination, all that kind of stuff, or not nomination, but opening, I guess we should say. We don't know yet what the nomination is going to be, but we're pretty sure that we know what the ballpark on that one's going to be. And there's a poll in Georgia.
We kind of know who it is. If this White House has even a modicum of common sense, even a modicum of common sense, we know who it's going to be. And it's going to be kind of a nothing burger. It's going to be a fairly easy confirmation process, a fairly expedient one. Although Susan Collins kind of tapped on the brakes a little bit today, which we can talk about. But there's not going to be this big DC drama. It's not going to be Brett Kavanaugh 2.0.
No, it's not even going to be Neil Gorsuch. It's not even going to be Amy Coney Barrett. This is nothing that's going to change the balance of the court. The Republicans really don't have any options to stop it anyway. But a new poll out of Georgia tells us that Joe Biden is really going to stick to his campaign promise to nominate a black female. I guess we can start off with this poll. It's probably the newsiest of the three stories, and it will lead us into a couple of the other topics that we want to get into. A new poll from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution shows that Joe Biden has gone from 51% approval in Georgia in May to 33% approval in Georgia, and that black voter approval of Joe Biden, or disapproval, I should say, black voter disapproval of Joe Biden has actually quadrupled in that same time period. This is what they're calling both a meltdown and a cliff.
Yeah, you remember when Joe Biden went down to Atlanta on Martin Luther King Day to give a speech with Kamala Harris, and it was going to be,
not with Stacey Abrams, but not with Stacey Abrams, which is a point that's going to come up here.
Or virtually any black advocacy group or any left-wing advocacy group that was down there. I mean, and again, this is Stacey Abrams, who is, running for re-election as governor of Georgia. Well, if you ask her anyway. But this is her signature issue, is the voting rights stuff, right? This is what her big thing to run on is. And the president of her party comes to her state when she is in an active campaign for governor, and the president comes to town to support her and her issue and does a national speech on it, and she's nowhere to be seen because she's got a scheduling conflict.
Well, now we know why.
Now we know why. The scheduling conflict is 33% in some polls, 37 in others, and then you've got this poll here. She's very attuned to poll-driven data.
And specific to Georgia in this particular case.
Specific to Georgia in this case.
That speech that we're talking about took place in Atlanta on January 18th. That was smack in the middle of this polling cycle for this poll that was conducted by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which I would emphasize is not exactly a bastion of conservative thought in Georgia. This one puts 62% of voters disapproving of his performance. It's a
you can't tell me Right. You can't tell me the Abrams campaign was not aware of some of this data
Right.
going into this
But
with their own internals.
But you have Biden going down there to try to rescue his standing, right? Especially among black voters. And the net result of this, of course, we don't know what the day-to-day polling is on this, but the net result of this from having this thing right in the middle of the polling cycle is that in May, only about 8% of black voters disapproved of Biden's performance. That number has more than quadrupled in AJC's latest poll, which found disapproval among black Georgians at 36%. 36%. I don't remember the last Democrat that even had really significant double-digit disapproval, let alone more than a third of this particular demo. This is disaster.
No, I mean, not to be over melodramatic, but I mean, you're going back into the '60s to get back to that kind of levels, right?
Right.
I mean,
yes.
You're getting into Dixiecrat time stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, this has had an impact on the overall Georgia political cast as well. Kemp versus Abrams in this poll, which is a rematch from 2018, right? Kemp is up 7.3 points over Abrams. Now,
that's outside margin of error.
It is outside margin of error. David Perdue, who is primarying Kemp, is also leading Abrams, although it's much narrower, 3.9%, which is within
margin of error.
Margin of error, yeah.
And I think there's also, isn't it like really tight? Kemp is like ahead of. No, it's not. It's not that tight. Kemp's ahead of former Senator
David Perdue
by what 10 12 points or something.
Yeah, I think I haven't looked at that one
in the primary.
I haven't looked at that one recently, right? But yes, and so this is, I mean, this poll here, this is a state that, let's not forget, Joe Biden narrowly won. He got 49% and a handful of the vote in 2020 against Donald Trump, and he's at 33% now in this poll. You've got another
the one that surprised me in that poll, if I remember right, I'm just going off the top of my head now. The one that surprised me is that it's got Herschel Walker up over Raphael Warnock, but only by like a point or something like that.
That's actually a different poll. In this poll, Warnock is ahead of Walker, but only by 3.5 points. So that's still within the statistical tie area. So it's tight. I think what both of those polls show is that Warnock might be a little tougher to beat than Republicans initially thought in Georgia. So that's something to keep in mind. However, and this is something I mentioned at Hot Air, that assumption, and this poll probably as well, is based on an assumption of a normal turnout cycle. What happens when you have a red wave where there's massive discontent with Joe Biden, where a third of black voters in Georgia are dissatisfied with Joe Biden? They're not exactly going to be thundering to the polls
to vote for Raphael Warnock, right? When Joe Biden is perceived to be hosing them, right?
Right. Well, the turnout models in a wave election are usually significantly different, and that's what this is shaping up to be. So I'd say that any comfort that Warnock is taking in these polling results should be tempered with a very large grain of salt. But if I was Stacey Abrams, I'd be even more panicked, maybe looking for a way out of what is looking to be an absolute tsunami against Democrats in Georgia. I mean, this is big time bad stuff for Democrats. This poll is, especially when you consider the source, it's not good, and it's all Biden driven. This is all Biden driven. He's
absolutely.
I mean, the collapse is just massive here.
So when Joe Biden now follows that up with trying to keep a promise that my Supreme Court nominee is going to be a black female, the question is that going to be perceived by this same base that is reflective in this polling? Is that just going to be perceived as pandering and they're not buying it? Or is this his way back to bringing African Americans back into the Democratic fold?
Let me posit a third option here, because I think that this is where I'm sort of landing on this. That's perceived now as minimum expectations. I don't think he gets brownie points for nominating
Ketanji
Brown Jackson or Leandra Kruger.
I don't think he does either.
But he gets massive problems if he doesn't, and that's what the problem is. He's already set the expectation with black voters that the next nominee to the Supreme Court is going to be a black woman. If he doesn't deliver on that,
then he's done.
Absolutely done. They just walk away at that point, and Biden can't afford that, and that's the reason why Jen Psaki got up yesterday. He said, "Oh yeah, no. We're going to honor that promise, and it's not going to be Kamala Harris. Stop talking about Kamala Harris. She's our running mate in 2020 or 2024. You know, that's they can't afford to do anything else other than that, Dwayne.
And again, you and I talked about this a little bit last night. I'm not here to demean the capabilities or qualities or qualifications of Judge Jackson here, Judge Brown Jackson here. The thing about her, though, is how is she going to feel if when she gets on the Supreme Court, knowing that the primary focus of why she is on that court is because of the color of her skin and her gender, rather than her merits.
And that's what makes that's what makes this unfair to the nominee too. I mean, it's that type of condescension, I think, that is long-term corrosive. But I think short-term politically, it paid off for Biden, and now I think he's stuck, and he just doesn't. Not that he wasn't going to do it anyway. I don't think any of us expected any differently. You have some people saying, an Asian American Pacific Islander would also make history. You take a look at this poll, and there's no way they're picking anybody else other than a black female. They can't afford to renege on this promise now.
But even going all the way back to the campaign promise, the pandering then should not have been necessary. If you are right, I mean, there's ways to do this. Right? Well, there's ways to do this.
I agree with you.
I want to see a Supreme Court that looks as diverse as the rest of the country without getting into specifics. When the opening comes up, then you say something like, I'm going to pick somebody that is the most perfectly qualified person for our time, for our station as a nation, and looking towards the future. You are going to be very pleased with the person I'm going to come up with, and you leave it at that. That way, you don't stereotype and pigeonhole the nominee that you're going to be putting in there and demeaning her capabilities by saying, well, she's first and foremost, she's a she, and second, she's black. Well, okay, that's just ham-handed politics.
No, I don't disagree with you, Dwayne. I really don't disagree with you on this. But that's Democrats' politics at the moment. He was stuck with that, I guess you could say, and therefore
he walked himself rhetorically into a Netterbox Canyon on this.
Right. Now he's stuck. He's going to have to deliver on this promise. That's what the upshot of this poll is for the Supreme Court nomination.
Agreed.
And Republicans, I mean, as long as he's not nominating Stacey Abrams, maybe her sister, Leslie Abrams Gardner, who's a district court judge in Florida, I believe it is, could certainly be a candidate and would be qualified. Don't forget, you don't have to have been a judge to be on the Supreme Court. Elena Kagan was Solicitor General and never did serve as a judge before she joined the court. I mean, literally, you don't even have to be a lawyer, although good luck getting that one through a Congress of any kind, especially a Congress filled with lawyers. But he's got qualified candidates, and as long as the candidate is at least qualified and not a lunatic, Republicans aren't going to turn this into a meltdown situation because there's no point to it. They don't have any. This isn't changing the balance of the court. There's really no point in making this into a massive fight when it's not going to change anything. Mitch McConnell is not as stupid politically as Chuck Schumer is.
Right. Remember, Chuck Schumer had the ability to not die on this hill with Neil Gorsuch when the Neil Gorsuch pick was not going to change the ideological makeup of the court, right?
Right, exactly.
At the time. And at that time, the filibuster rule was still such that it still took a 60-vote majority to be able to seat a Supreme Court justice. Now, Harry Reid had broken the filibuster rule for circuit courts and district court judges and executive nominations, but for Supreme Courts, that was a carve out that Harry Reid tried to preserve. Well, when Neil Gorsuch came along and the Republican president, Donald Trump, had a chance with a Republican Senate to put through a Supreme Court pick, all of a sudden Chuck Schumer started to say, we're going to filibuster this justice and not even let you proceed to the pick because he wanted to get even for Merrick Garland. And instead of being politically astute and looking forward a couple steps, he decided to, pull this stunt, and Mitch McConnell and Republicans said, fine, we owe you in kind anyway. And so we're going to blow up the filibuster and make it a complete blow up on this. And that's why you now have Neil Gorsuch as Supreme Court Justice, along with Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett.
Right.
Mitch McConnell is not that politically daft. He's not that stupid. He's not going to charge up this hill to try to defeat a black female when you've got polling that Mitch McConnell sees and every other Republican sees that African Americans are showing enough discontent with this president, not just in Georgia, but nationwide, along with Hispanics and other minority groups. If you've got people coming your way, why pick a fight with a black female nominee when you don't have to, and it's not gonna affect anything?
Now,
They're
Dwayne,
not gonna do that.
I have to disagree, because Joe Biden has gotten maybe the best political advice you could possibly get from the media in the form of John Harris's column this morning at Politico.
and we like John Harris a lot.
I do. Actually, I don't mean to. I mean, John Harris writes some very entertaining stuff. Sometimes it's pretty smart. This is not one of those times.
This is not one of those times. This is John Harris. It's pretty hysterical. As much as the media, the Beltway bubble, got the vapors every time Donald Trump opened up his trap and said something, pointed to the back of the room when he was doing his rallies at the cameras in the background and calling him the enemy of the people and all sorts of insults. Stuff that
all the insults, all the demeaning names. It was the end of the republic. It was the end of the republic. We needed to restore the norms. We needed to restore comity. We needed to restore dignity in the
Jim Acosta with his microphone from a GOP rally or from a Trump rally, saying, I'm worried about my life here. I'm fearful for my life. I'm doing this for the cause, because these people are going to kill me because Trump is getting them all riled up. People at a Trump rally could care less about Jim Acosta. They'll boo him. They'll give him a hard time, but they think he's a clown. They don't. There was never that kind of drama that Jim Acosta was building up. But as much as the media got just totally wee-weed up because of all these insults that Donald Trump hurled at him, to have John Harris now say, well, you know what we need? We need Joe Biden to kind of be a little more Trumpy towards right-wing media.
Not just a little more Trumpy. Not just a little bit more Trumpy. I mean, he's saying, pardon the language here, but they've got it asterisked out, but John Harris wants Biden to engage in shit talk at reporters and his political opponents. Now, bear in mind, this comes just 8 days after this demagogic meltdown of a speech in Georgia, which even Dick Durbin had to distance himself from. So, I mean, first off,
8 days after that, but what? 4 days after what he calling Peter Ducey a stupid son of a bitch.
Yeah, the Peter Ducey thing is actually the catalyst for this, right? I mean, this was the whole encounter, including Ducey's genial refusing to get all huffy about Biden's flash of huffiness, was in its own way quite winning. It's also a reminder of how many memorable Biden moments feature casual profanity or bursts of authentic emotion amid the pervasive phoniness of contemporary politics.
Who did that? Who did the Ducey episode? Who did that win to his side?
I mean, I don't know that it won or lost anybody. I mean, it was just sort of a nothing burger. I thought Hannity and Ducey treated it exactly the way it should be treated, as just something to be, just an amusement, a sideshow.
Absolutely. If the White House perceived this the same way John Harris perceived this, then why did Joe Biden make the phone call to Peter Ducey that night to say, well, it's just business, pal, it's nothing personal? Why did he even make the call?
I guess to complete the authenticity loop. I don't know what to tell you. I actually think the call was a good idea. I think it would have been better if he'd actually apologized, but I think the call was a good idea. But
I agree with you on both points. But I'm saying if John Harris is actually offering astute political advice here, then he and the progressives should actually be more upset at Biden for walking away from it and trying to do a cleanup by calling him and sort of apologizing.
No, I think it's a great point, but I mean, there's another big issue. There's a much bigger issue with John Harris's advice, which is, Biden needs to express that authenticity by cursing people out and insulting. And first off, there's actually a number of problems with this. First off, that's what Donald Trump did for 4 years, and everybody, was doing pearl clutching the entire time over mean tweets. I mean, I didn't like them either, and I would prefer a president who can at least modulate that, so that you're not throwing that, because that was his problem in the crisis. He didn't modulate it. That's the reason why he lost the election.
One of the reasons that Donald Trump lost is especially in that first debate, and largely how he comported himself on Twitter and other public venues as rallies. He turned off elderly, and he turned off suburban moms by and large. And there's a lot of suburban moms that said, I will never vote for that man again because he's a jerk. And so John Harris's recipe, and those people largely voted for Joe Biden because they hated Trump, and Trump turned them off and repelled them. And so they came to Joe Biden's side. So John Harris's RX now for Joe Biden to get his mojo back is to act in the very same way, which is going to be repellent to that same group of people that floated from Trump back over to Biden.
Yeah, doesn't make any sense at all. This is
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And that's assuming, of course, that Joe Biden is lucid enough, often enough, to be able to hold that thing, which we know is not the case.
Yeah, let's see this clip from yesterday, right?
This is just from yesterday. So John Harris likes this sparky Joe Biden, where he's at least sharp, right? He's on his game, and when he hears something he doesn't like, he barks at somebody. But at least it's showing that he's got authority when he barks at somebody, right?
Yeah.
Well, here is Joe Biden in full authority of his mental faculties.
But I might point out, when I went to Dearborn, driving that, was up there. I don't know, man. I think the press thought I was crazy. I enjoyed it so much going up in your new EV factory in that Hummer.
You see, when he finally got to the point where he was talking about Hummers, it made me think, well, maybe he might nominate Kamala Harris after all.
Be careful, Dwayne.
Did I say that out loud? Did I say that out loud? Careful.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go any further than that.
Getting back to the point. First off, Hummers aren't made at Ford plants, right? That's a GM. Aren't Hummers GM?
Yeah. You typically don't find those at a Dearborn Ford plant. You typically don't.
No, not unless somebody's driving the competition. But beyond this, a call for Biden to express his authenticity overlooks the fact that Biden is an authentic asshole. I mean, I'm sorry. I know we're PG-13 at this point. You started it, Dwayne. But
hey, I did not use one of the 7 bad words. I just simply, if you troll around the inner tubes enough, if you troll around the interwebs, you might stumble on what that reference may be. But just to the casual church-going observer, You have no idea what I'm talking about.
Well, there you go. But I mean, this is a guy who's a vacuous jerk, has been a vacuous jerk demonstrably for decades.
For 50 years.
Right. He's a blowhard. He's a liar. He's a plagiarist. He's a serial plagiarist. He plagiarized in law school. He plagiarized Neil Kinnock's speeches, including Neil Kinnock's background in the 1987 campaign. I mean, we have all sorts of instances where he tries to square off on people in public that disagree with him. I mean, the "you're a lying dog-faced pony soldier" moment, which was bizarre in 2019, is hardly the only instance of this. Mickey Kaus wrote about the 1987 instance. This is back in 2008 when Obama picked him for the ticket. This guy's
he was at a campaign stop in Iowa, and somebody asked him a hard question, and he didn't like it, and offered to step outside with the guy.
Right. This is a guy who's basically an idiot, and 20 pounds of BS in a 10-pound bag, as I have often described Joe Biden. And you don't want that authenticity. The reason why we have the media narrative of empathetic, gentle Joe is to avoid people getting a look at the authentic Joe Biden. We saw flashes of the authentic Joe Biden 8 days ago in Georgia. We saw a flash, a mild flash. Really, honestly, I think, George W. Bush did basically the same thing with Adam Clymer. I mean, that's not meaningful. I'm surprised that John Harris thinks it is. But it's really bad advice to say, what we really need to see is the authentic Joe Biden. The authentic Joe Biden is an incompetent version of Donald Trump. He's a narcissist. Yes. He's a profane, idiotic narcissist who's incompetent at his job. And I mean, as much as one can personally dislike Donald Trump, at least he could do the job.
It's Donald Trump without the instincts and accomplishments.
Right. Exactly. And I think it's perfectly acceptable to say, I don't want Donald Trump in office because he doesn't know how to comport himself, and I want a president that I can respect. I totally get that. And I totally think that that's valid. But don't turn around then and tell me, but you know what we need to see is more of Biden swearing and cursing people out and fulminating angrily on social media. I mean, we might as well just go back to Donald Trump if that's what you want, because at least Donald Trump knew what he was doing.
Yes.
Good Lord.
That's exactly right.
I
go
ahead. I'm sorry.
I would say we're almost up against it already.
Yeah, we are. But one thing really quickly before we get to what's coming up on Hugh Hewitt for Friday's show. Did you see the economic numbers that came out this morning?
I did. We had a GDP growth in the fourth quarter that was north of 6% or something.
6.9% GDP growth, and these are inflation. Yeah. These are inflation adjusted numbers. I have a post that's coming up that it'll be up by the time this podcast drops, which is, I mean, that's a real number. However, it's built on really weak consumer spending, super weak final sales of domestic product. And I think that what you're looking at here is mostly business investment, which is good, and a very unusual export boost. Exports were up 24.5%. Imports were up 17% in the fourth quarter. And I'm not sure why, because the PCE numbers were kind of weak still, 3.3% growth. So I think that, first off, I think you're going to see a little bit of a downgrade in the next revision on Q4 GDP. But I also think that what you're seeing here is inventory restocking to some extent, which is good news in itself in the supply chains. But I'm not sure it signifies what people think it signifies, especially since the context of this was the cratering in 2020. I think that you're coming off of a really low point, and you want to see numbers like this. I'm just not sure that we're seeing strength.
Look, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure that the average American voter is going to look at that number and say, well, I guess things are going pretty good when everything costs 4 times what it cost a year ago. That people don't go around pumping gas in and say, boy, I can't believe how fortunate I am to be able to pump this much gas into my car for this much money just to show how robust the economy is. That's not what they're thinking, right?
Nope. That's not what they're thinking at all. All right. What's coming up on the next Hugh Hewitt show?
Well, Representative Michael Waltz is going to be on. We are going to have, it's actually going to be a fairly interesting show. We've got several people that are kind of sparky that are going to be on. Jim Banks is going to be on. Doug Ducey, governor of Arizona, is going to be on. Michael Waltz will do a little movies with our movie critic Sonny Bunch, and then we will continue to analyze the political scene from the Hillsdale College perspective with our guy in the Kirby Center in D.C. Larry Yarn's going to be off for a week, so I keep forgetting his name now. Dean
Wormer?
I can't remember his name.
Dean Vernon Wormer.
But it'll be a Hillsdale dialogue.
Okay.
But Michael Waltz is very much going to be talking about what to do with Ukraine and what we should be doing as far as a response to the buildup and how to arm Ukraine to combat the growing Russia tide. I'm absolutely convinced that he is going to be in agreement that we should be arming Ukraine to the teeth, which we're not doing enough of and fast enough now. But all that's going to happen tomorrow on Hugh Show.
And of course, if you want to see Hugh do the show, you got to join the Hugniverse, HUGHNIVERSE.com, the troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt fans and listeners. I'm a member. I'm also a guest on Dwayne's After Show, which is one of the benefits of being a member of the Hugniverse. If you're not a member of the Hugniverse, you have to listen on the AM radio dial. Dwayne, what should people do if they can't find Hugh on the AM radio dial?
Well, I guess you have to go in with to a GM's office that is at a station that we belong, and you bring in a black female with you, because apparently that's the first prerequisite of any kind of convincing you need to do. Any kind of candidate in order to convince people that this is the right person for the job. You've got to go in there with a black female, and that should be enough to convince any GM to bring us on, right?
I was actually going to suggest that you have to walk in and swear a lot and insult people and talk
curse
about
out the GM.
Curse out the GM. Got to curse out the GM, and you've got to talk about the Hummers they're building at that Ford plant in Dearborn, because that's apparently the winning strategy. But if that doesn't work, you can go to HughHewitt.com and listen to the audio stream there.
Or you bring Anthony Fauci with you, and you say, if you don't put us on, I'm going to have Anthony Fauci vaccinate every one of your 4-year-old kids. That's what I'm going to do.
Well, if you want more on that, you have to listen to Dwayne's After Show. And Dwayne is going to talk about that topic, I think, at more length. We talked about it last night. I'm sure you're going to talk about it at more length tonight. 8 p.m. Eastern time in the Hugniverse. That's when the After Show starts. Dwayne Generalissimo Patterson, thanks for being with us today. And welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Joining me today, my good friend AJ Kaufman from pjmedia.com, my Salem colleague, my town hall colleague now, and doing his own thing, as it were, over at PJ, over at Instapundit and PJ Media. AJ has a bold set of predictions for 2022, and I have to first off say that I don't think that, and I know I'm giving the game away here a bit, AJ, but I'm not sure that Kamala Harris continuing to lash out with divisive nonsense is really a bold prediction.
Well, to some people it might be. I'm sure she does have 35% approval, so they might be surprised. I would not. No, it would not come as a surprise to me if that continued.
No.
Next 11, 12 months.
No, but I mean, you did something more than I did. I really, honestly, I'm not doing predictions anymore. I don't do resolutions, and I stopped doing predictions because I don't know. I just think that maybe satire, maybe political satire is dead because politicians keep proving to be sort of self-satirizing. But you seem to still want to do these, and I actually really enjoyed your piece over at PGA Media, and of course we're going to link it in the show post. But tell us a little bit about, first off, why you're still making predictions even after the last crazy 2 years.
I don't think I've ever made predictions, so I have that going for me. I really don't. I don't make resolutions, and I don't think I've made predictions. And these came about, when did this publish? These came about literally on New Year's Eve. I was sitting around, watching meaningless college football or news or whatever was going on. And I said, I should put together 5, I believe I called them fearless predictions. Maybe fearful would have been better for the new year. And they're pretty short. There is some sarcasm in them. And, I don't think I went out on a limb too much in any of them. And judging by a perusal of the comments, only one of them really got people to question my predictions. And even then it was kind of a vague anger or questioning. But there were 5 and they were pretty short.
They are actually pretty short, and I would almost argue that one of them is already starting to come true. I mean,
number one.
Number one, yeah, number one. I mean, the Omicron variant. As we're talking about this, and obviously we're doing pre-records now, so these are going to come out a little bit later on. But as we're talking about it, it's the first Monday in January, and we're seeing cases spike way the hell up. And if there's anything true about epidemiology and math, it's that the higher the spike, the higher the fall. I mean, more rapid the fall. This is a statistical model that's bound for a very short run. So, I mean, I think that this is a pretty safe prediction, I think, is that the Omicron variant is going to run through all of the population across the United States, probably just in the next, 3-4 weeks.
Yeah. It's widespread. It's everywhere. I don't know that every American will get it. I don't know that half the Americans will get it, but you will start hearing more people in the pundit class, in the media class, the political class getting it. It seems to become more acceptable amongst those people also. They used to be, at least best I recall, it used to be whenever someone would get anyone would get coronavirus, COVID, you'd hear, oh, they must be an unvaccinated redneck. They must be a denier. They must be someone in a red state. And now that, we see everyone getting it, it seems like, or at least a good percentage of the ruling class, people are like, yeah, it's going to happen. It may not last very long, and it may peak in the next 2 weeks in certain parts of the country, probably the Northeast, maybe here in the upper Midwest. But the hospitalizations, if you read through even some New York Times articles, there's some evidence that these hospitalizations are not really as high as people say they are, or the number you hear of 92% or whatever is actually normal for this time of year. I'm certainly far from anyone who's going to deny science and data, but people aren't really dying. Deaths are down, still too many per day, but those deaths are mostly not from Omicron.
Delta is still circulating too. I mean, that's something that we have to remember, is that Delta is still circulating. Omicron does appear to crowd it out. So if you get exposed to Omicron first, you're a lot less likely to develop Delta, apparently, at least according to the data that we're seeing out of South Africa. And I think in part the UK on that as well. But it's still circulating in the United States. The reason why you've got the high hospitalization utilization in the Northeast right at the moment is because that's Delta that's mostly been circulating up there. But I mean, I think that we can expect this to be, fairly, you can see this decoupling already taking place. And so I think the more that Omicron spreads, the more you're going to see deaths and hospitalizations really start to plunge as well.
I think so too. And you can just think about all the athletes you see listed as having COVID and all these games that are being canceled. Then you hear General or Secretary Austin has it, or a certain media pundit you listen to has it, and they're gone for 2 weeks, and then they come back, or a senator, even elderly senators, and they're back, and they don't die. Now, obviously, I know that 820,000 people or whatever have died in the U.S., so no one's making light of that, and that's a caveat we should always include. But
right,
you also have to look at comorbidities. I read something the other day, maybe it was today, things run together, that 2/3 of the teens that are hospitalized, and most teens don't get hospitalized, had severe obesity, not just obesity, but severe obesity. So when you see a story that says an 11-year-old boy died, heaven forbid, and then you find out that he's 320 pounds, there's reasons some of these things happen, underlying situations. So the fear mongering is continuing, but Fauci was on yesterday. There's a little contradiction in some of what they're saying, but they're starting to admit some things, that Omicron does appear to be causing milder illness, certainly in children, I've read, and certainly most likely in adults as we continue to wait for this. The holiday season certainly increases the likelihood of transmission. So I think 2 weeks from now, we'll have a lot better idea, because people are just getting back from large gatherings, and the virus might have spread during those times for sure.
Well, and I think the key here too is that we now know that the vaccinated are vectors for transmission on Omicron.
Yes.
We're pretty sure that that's true with Delta too, actually. But it's certain that that Omicron. So there's vaccination status doesn't really have anything to do with it. It does have to do with how much either one is going to impact your health, though, which is the reason why you should be vaccinated. You should be boosted, is because people who are vaccinated and boosted have far lower hospitalization rates and almost zero deaths, as opposed to the people who are unvaccinated. And that's one of the tools out there. You got to take advantage of those tools. But that's the reason why I think that this thing's going to spread like wildfire across the entire United States. And I think eventually, over the next few weeks, all of us are going to come into contact with it. Most of us probably won't ever know that we came into contact with it. And I think it's going to basically burn out the pandemic aspect of COVID-19. And after that, we're going to have to shift to the endemic response. Zero COVID is dead either way. There's no such thing as zero COVID. There isn't going to be
dead from the beginning.
It should have been, yeah.
Now the question of whether or not you need to be boosted if you're under 50 or 60, I don't know if that's. I'm not an anti-vax person, and I'm not an obsessive pro-vax person who runs out the first day. That's questionable. I think if you're relatively healthy, no comorbidities, and you're under 50, I think it's certainly up to you. I don't think you should be pushed into a booster, but it certainly wouldn't hurt you to get the booster. And I don't know what the percentage is now. What is it? 30% of Americans have gotten boosted, 35, something like that. I don't think you're going to see that get above 50, even with the major spread the next 2 weeks. Right. I don't think it's going to get much above 50, because people also are concerned about whether they need another one in April and then in July. And, certain people will get them every day. We know people who would like to get one every day at 9 a.m. They would like to get a COVID shot. People. I know people.
Yeah, no.
I
agree.
They're waiting for the 4th and 5th breathlessly. That's all they're concerned about. And that's the other extreme.
Well, anyway, I think that's a pretty safe bet. Let's go to prediction number 2. And I think we can dispense with the spoiler alerts here. I mean, by the time we get a chance to air this will have been up for a while. So, I mean, I think we can talk through all 5 of your predictions here. The February Beijing Olympics. You know who's not calling it the Beijing Olympics, AJ?
Me.
No, NBC is not calling it. I was watching the football game on Sunday night. That was the Packers, and that really close, so dramatic game against the Minnesota
Minneapolis St. Paul Vikings. Yes.
Yeah. I don't mean to rub salt in the wounds, but basically the commercials were the only thing that was really worth watching during that game.
I watched it off of the first quarter.
Well, you were smarter than I was. I had a migraine, and it was just really easier to just leave it on there because I didn't want to have to intellectually engage with anything. But the one thing I noticed was that NBC was promoting, the Winter Olympics are coming up. The Winter Olympics, the Winter Olympics, Winter Olympics, Winter Olympics. Guess who's going to be at the Winter Olympics? Guess where the Winter Olympics are going to be held? You wouldn't have known it except for this little tiny little logo in the bottom corner of the of the screen. It said Beijing. NBC is really trying to debrand China off of these Olympics. I find this amusing as hell.
Yeah, Bob Costas was on a podcast, a conservative podcast, a couple weeks ago with Jim Garrity, and he's pretty down in the Olympics. Now, he's not involved this year, I don't believe, so it's easier for him to say that. But he seems to be pretty upset with the IOC for granting it to Beijing, and seemingly, without saying it, upset that NBC is going gung-ho for it, though. Are they really going gung-ho? I mean, it starts in a month, and it's limited advertising when there is, like you said, they're not talking about where it is, and they're focusing on an athlete here or there. But my prediction was just that, the genocide games, as I call them, I don't know if I made that up myself, but I've been calling it that, will be a fiasco of illness, and people will get sick. I hopefully not seriously. Controversy, that's already occurred, and record low television ratings as the liberal West appeases the communist thugs. I mean, not everyone in the liberal West, but I don't know anybody who's interested in this. I know a few people who watch the Olympics every 4 years. They tend to like the Summer Olympics better. And when it comes to the Winter Olympics, outside of some things like curling and skiing that people up here in the North enjoy, there's a lack of interest. And there's no men's hockey. I mean, there is, but they're not using the NHL players. They backed out a week or two ago. The NHL did, because they've lost so many games to COVID during the year. They can't afford to have a 3-week shutdown like they were planning. So it's going to be pretty bad. China's still going to get a propaganda victory over it. They're still going to make money off it. They're still going to get a chance to display in their opening and closing ceremonies whatever they display, as we've seen in the past. I'll pass.
Well, do you think they're going to go off at all? I mean, that's sort of my question to you, is that, with this Omicron wave, China's busy locking down entire provinces again. I would argue though, that that's because they know their vaccines don't work.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they don't work. Sinopharm and Sinovac don't work. The UAE tried them out. Chile tried them out. They don't work.
Ed, they only have 4,300 deaths in a country of over 1 billion.
Yeah, right.
4,300. That's fewer than in the state of, Minnesota.
What was it last week? They were claiming that they'd only identified 9 cases of Omicron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was last week. Now they're up to 19.
Yeah, sure, pal. Yeah, you betcha. I
don't think they talk like
that. No, they don't even talk like that in Minnesota. Come on, guys. I mean, we just like to, it's not we any longer. I'm down here in Texas, but
if you go far enough north to some of the small towns, you'll hear it occasionally.
You will hear it occasionally, but we just mostly like to, Minnesotans just mostly like to play with the tourists.
Yes.
With that stuff. So, yeah, AJ can tell you all about that. But, I mean, do you think that this could derail the games? Do you think that and let me put it to you this way. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're not going to talk about, clearly governments don't want to boycott. I actually think it's a stupid idea to do that kind of a boycott, keeping your athletes from going. We tried it in 1980, didn't do a damn bit of good.
We discussed that, yeah.
Yeah. I actually am fine with the idea of a diplomatic boycott, because at least it's something. Again, it's sort of impotent, but you're not.
Very impotent.
Yeah, well, the whole thing's impotent, right? I mean, but at least you're not interfering with the athlete's ability to compete. But here's the thing: with Omicron, you've got this wildly transmissible variant, and there's all sorts of quarantining and travel restrictions on people who test positive. You're looking at a situation where people might be stranded for weeks if they come in contact with this variant. And even though they're not really, there's no real risk to their health or anybody else's health that comes in contact with them, except for the extremely obese, the very elderly, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it just is a matter of practicality. Can these games go off, or will they end up getting Tokyo'd?
Well, Tokyo's went off. They just didn't have any fans, right?
Well, it was a year later, right?
Oh, right. They were supposed to be in 2020.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. They probably would have had to already decide that, is my guess. But, there certainly might not be fans. And yeah, I wrote about this, I don't know, a few weeks ago, the concern about, when I was writing about China's dishonest COVID numbers, the concern about athletes who go there and have to quarantine for 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks during and after the Olympics. That's they can catch the virus when they're there. They can be told they have the virus, and if there are new variants emerging, will the communist government even tell us before it's too late?
Yeah.
So it's a problem. I certainly, if my brother, son, daughter, whatever was an Olympian, I wouldn't be sending him to China at this point, much less because of China's appalling human rights records, but also what's going on in the world with the virus. So I think it's all a problem, and I hope it all works out. Frankly, for the Olympians and for the world, not so much for China. I don't really care if they do have a great post or not.
Well, same here. Yeah. I'm going to skip over number 4. Just go to number 5 briefly. This is part of that oh so bold prediction that Kamala Harris was going to lash out with divisive nonsense. But the other half of that, I think, is also a pretty safe bet, AJ, which is that the White House's inexcusable apathy will cause the U.S.-Mexico border to remain a sieve. Yeah, I mean, only for brief periods in the last, 40 years. Well, beyond that, really. Has it not been a sieve? I mean, really, 60,
right? But the numbers, at least they're the highest in 15 or 20 or 25 years, and I think they go up don't they go up this time of year because it's not as hot down at the border?
I believe that's correct. Yes,
February, March. So I think Alejandro Mayorkas is in a cabinet of many, many, many incompetent people. I think he's clearly the worst, both as a communicator, as a figure in policy. Like to get rid of. I think he should go away. I think even Jay Johnson, as we've talked about from Obama's era, was far better. Would have been far better. I don't assume Biden would replace him with any kind of Republican or someone who's a little more hawkish. But Biden's fired nobody. I mean, there's not one person who's lost their job as far as I know, except for people who've been denied, during the hearings of getting a job, like the communist lady from Moscow State and such. But, with all the problems we've had in Afghanistan, with all the problems had at the border, not to mention supply chain, no one's lost their job. But I think Mayorkas should be the first to fall on his sword, and hopefully have a replacement that's better. And no, Kamala she didn't want that role. She has no interest in it, which is kind of sad, but she's not going to do anything for the border because, we're not conspiratorial here, but I don't think Democrats really care.
Well, I agree with you. There's not much to say about this. I mean, I think that the situation at the border is going to continue exactly as it is because this is an administration of incompetence, starting at the top. And Kamala Harris is just the number 2 incompetent. And it's the top incompetent that is setting the tone for everybody else. And that isn't changing in 2022. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty safe bet. But let's go to the one real bet that you're placing here, which is what happens in the midterms. Now, this is bold. I have to say that predicting the midterm outcomes in January is pretty bold. And so
people have been predicting them since last January. Some people,
they're bold too. But I mean, but I think you raise a very interesting point here. One that sometimes gets missed in all of the talk about polling and trends and, historical trends and that sort of thing. You're predicting that Republicans are going to reclaim the House easily. I think that's a very safe bet. Just structurally, they should be able to do that. But you're saying that you don't think that Republicans can retake the Senate. And I started off being skeptical of that just because of the numbers. I mean, Republicans are defending several more seats than the Democrats are, and they've got 5 retirements. But, they're going to have to start over with a non-incumbent in those races. So, yeah, I mean, I can kind of go along with you on that. But I've actually gotten a little bit more optimistic about it in the last few weeks based on Joe Biden's standing in some of these states. I mean, he's underwater by double digits in the states that you're talking about: Arizona, Georgia, Ohio, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. And Pennsylvania, I think he's underwater by 9 points.
We talk about this in a vacuum, though. It's one of those things. Cable news clips. They're going to take the House. They're going to take the Senate. But no one ever talks about the actual states. And when they talk about the states, and I didn't do it here because I just wanted to put something out there and see if people started talking about it.
Right.
The candidates. I mean, how many people even know forget the Republican options, who the Democrats are running in some of these states? We know in Georgia and Arizona because they're incumbents, but in Ohio, in North Carolina, in Pennsylvania, like in Wisconsin, who are the Democrats running? I mean, the people don't know that. If the Democrats run people like Tim Ryan, who we've talked about is not as moderate as he says, but has that moderate appeal because he's from Youngstown, Ohio, which is a swing area. If they run Conor Lamb, who I believe is running in Pennsylvania, that gives the Republicans a much, much tougher road to hoe.
Yep.
Ohio, I was in Ohio for 10 days during my full December on the road trip that I just got back from. And the Republicans have problems in Ohio. And I know people forget that Barack Obama won the state twice. They forget that Sherrod Brown, who's very far left, has won re-election there several times. You would think that running the J.D. Vance, Josh Mandel, young populist crowd would work, but I couldn't find anybody who's excited about those guys. And I was talking to people from suburban areas of Columbus and Cleveland to rural parts of Eastern Ohio. And no one's excited about those two guys. And the other candidates, there's a Bernie Moreno, a businessman. Some of them are, some of them will be called rhinos because they're not right wing enough. Whereas J.D. Vance, who's a populist, is right wing, but he's really not because he's actually a big government guy. They've got major problems in Ohio, the Republicans, and that's a state they certainly can't afford to lose because we're already assuming that Pennsylvania and Wisconsin will be very hard to keep just because they're blue states. Let's be honest. Yes, Trump won Wisconsin once and then he lost. Wisconsin has a very liberal governor, a very liberal other senator, and Ron Johnson is not, I'm sorry if anyone's listening who loves him, and I know people love him. I like certain things about him. He's not going to win in Wisconsin. He's just too far right and too abrasive and has had too many conspiratorial comments, in my opinion, to win. I hope he does, but he also may not run. He's got to decide, by the way, in the next few weeks, I would think.
Next couple of weeks, really, if they're going to draft you're going to have to draft a candidate to replace him. I mean, right now there aren't any Republicans stepping up because they don't want to. They don't want to run a primary.
You know who I would like to see run. I think he'd win.
Scott Walker.
And Mike Gallagher, the congressman from Green Bay,
yes.
Who's a star.
Yep, he'd be very good. He'd be very good. Yes,
Walker would be good too, but he is a little polarizing because he obviously was governor for quite a while, and he may turn out people on the left.
Well, look, he won 3 elections for 2 terms.
He did, and he should have won last time. Frankly,
should have won last time too. Yeah.
So that would be interesting. I don't know what he's, like anyone else, just like Paul Ryan, speaking of Wisconsin and others, he's just out there kind of giving speeches and making money and doing whatever he's doing. I'm sure he would run if he was asked or drafted, but it's going to be tough. I think people don't look at the states. On the other hand, the positive, like you said, Biden's underwater in a lot of these places. And we haven't even talked about Nevada and New Hampshire, which are Democrat states that they have to hold.
Oh, and Arizona. In Arizona, too.
Yes, in Arizona, right.
Arizona, Georgia. I think it's going to end up being Purdue running in Georgia. And he's one state.
Wait, Purdue is running for governor, though.
I'm sorry, you're right. Purdue's running for governor. Who was it that was going to run for senator?
Herschel Walker, and there's another African-American fellow.
Oh, Vernon Jones.
Oh, Vernon Jones is also another guy I wrote about who's a military veteran who's black, who's early 40s. And there's another Marine Corps veteran who worked for Trump, who Lackland, starts with an L. Latham Sadler, I think his name is. They have some good candidates. But the entertainment wing, if you will, the populist wing, Trump and others, want Herschel Walker. And I understand why, but I have very smart friends who think Walker is the best option. And I don't see it.
I'm kind of with you on that. Not that I dislike Herschel Walker, but I am leery of entertainment options. I'd rather have, like Winsome Sears was not an entertainment option.
No,
she was a legitimate. She was a
serious woman.
Serious woman, and that worked out great in Virginia, and I wish that people would remember.
She was running for lieutenant governor, a little different, obviously, than
but still a statewide election. And she was running as basically, they don't really run as running mates in Virginia,
right? They don't.
But it kind of is sort of that way, regardless of how you think about it, or regardless of how it actually is. It's kind of usually the fortunes of one are tied to the other. And
Kelvin King, by the way, is the other black guy who's running as a Republican.
That's right.
Very impressive. Much more impressive than Herschel Walker, frankly. Also a football player, by the way, in college. And Latham Sadler is the other gentleman who's also a young guy. So I like all those guys, frankly, better than Walker.
Be a good primary. Should be a good primary in Georgia. I mean, at least
should be a good primary.
They've got options.
And Nevada has, I assume, Adam Laxalt, who you've heard the name for many years. He was Attorney General, was he?
Yeah, it is. I mean, Laxalts they're
famous,
very famous political. Paul Laxalt was a senator for what? I don't know. Many years, yeah, several terms. So
I think Nevada went maybe a month ago. There was a poll a month ago where they moved all these states. I think Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada were the 3 from lean Democrat to toss up, and Nevada was on that list, and that kind of caught people's attention. And in Nevada, I'm sure, like you said, Biden's approval numbers are probably not that great. And it's still a predominantly white state. I mean, Latino would be the number 2.
Right, yeah.
But outside of Vegas, it's a pretty conservative state. Not that there's a huge population.
Libertarian. It's more of a libertarian state.
Right. Well, they're not voting for Democrats, libertarian, in Nevada, out west. So we'll see. We'll see there. In New Hampshire, we have to get a candidate because obviously the Governor Sununu and former Senator Ayotte decided not to run. And Scott Brown, who we talked about a month ago, he put that to bed pretty quickly. He's not running.
Yep.
His wife is running, though, for House, I believe.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah.
That broke today, actually. And out in Arizona, I'll tell you, I happened to be in Arizona and Ohio for my trip, coincidentally. And the people I talked to a lot of retirees where my parents live, Republicans, and mostly very conservative Republicans, some of them very involved in the Republican Party of Arizona, some of them not, but all conservatives, all voted for Trump. But all of them, except for one who was wishy-washy, said we need to move on from Trump in 2024.
Yeah.
And I don't need to get into that because we've all had people talk to us about that. But they all were big Trump supporters who said, move on. And when it came to the Senate, they all, except for one, agreed that they all agreed Mark Kelly has become a rubber stamp for Biden, and that's very disappointing, and they need to get rid of him. But they all pretty much said, no Kelly Ward, no one from that far right wing of the party, or conspiracy wing, I'd call it, have already lost. But none of them knew who was going to run. They all were like, well, we could run Congressman Lasko, who's a female congressman from their area. They started talking about their congressman, but they don't really have a strong candidate in Arizona yet to run. There's a retired general who might run or is running. But yeah, it's very winnable seat, obviously, but you got to have a candidate.
You do. And that's the missing piece. And I mean, that's the point of your prediction, is that we're talking a lot about polling. We're talking about a lot about Joe Biden. We're talking a lot about historical trends, and all those things actually still do matter. But you have to have a functioning opposition party on the ground, and you have to have a candidate that can actually win an election. And
I don't know why it's so hard to understand that.
Well, especially after the 2010 Tea Party cycle, and to a certain extent the 2012 one as well. We put up a couple of humdingers in those cycles and lost seats that we should have won.
Todd Aiken, Christine O'Donnell crowd.
Yeah.
Sharon Engel.
Yeah. Sharon Engel, Todd Aiken, Christine O'Donnell. Look, I mean, I think that Todd Aiken one was the worst choice.
In a red state.
In a red state, no less. Yeah.
Yeah, he just died, didn't he, recently? Very recently.
Oh, I hadn't heard that. Well, then rest in peace. I mean, there's no
he
need
wasn't
to,
that old a man. I think it was maybe a month or two ago. He died. Yeah, 70 years old or so. He died.
Yeah, no need to flog a day. No need to flog that then. But I mean, the issue there is what happens when you get a bad candidate in a Senate race and in something where there's going to have national implications. Yes. Is that it damages the whole party, especially if you're Republican. If it's a Democrat, the media doesn't cover it the same way. I call this the Todd Aiken rule, is that if you say something stupid and you're Republican, then every other Republican candidate has to answer.
Have to comment on it, right?
Yeah, the media will ask you to comment on it. If it's a Democrat that says something stupid, they don't do that with other Democratic candidates.
No one asked them to comment on Ilhan Omar and those people, right?
Nope. You never hear that from media outlets. So,
well, I'll tell you what. I think I'm trying to find where I wrote about this briefly about electable candidates, because I had this talk with Kyle Hooton of Alpha News, who was saying just run the most radical populist candidates, and I said that's great, but they don't win. You can run them in Wyoming and Alabama, but you can't run them in suburban Columbus, Ohio, or Nevada. And I can't find the article, but the point is, Republicans in 2014 did very well because they figured things out from the mistakes of 2012 and 2010, and McConnell got the right candidates. And you may not like Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski or Mitt Romney, but they're going to vote Republican more often than any Democrat is.
Yep.
I had a conversation today with someone who said, I like Manchin more than Romney. And I said, well, okay, I'm glad Manchin did what he did, but Mitt Romney still has a stronger Republican voting record than Joe Manchin.
Right.
And that's not going to, and they may like Manchin, they may think he's braver than Romney, but Susan Collins, for example, won her race by 11 points in a state that Trump lost by 10 or 11, whatever it was. So, Larry Hogan, you may not like him. He's very anti-Trump, liberal Republican, but if he runs for Senate in deep blue Maryland and has an outside chance, that's better than anything else.
I'll back him. I'll cheer him on. I mean, I remember what happened to Norm Coleman when the National Party turned its back on Norm Coleman. That was before the Tea Party. So it wasn't even, these purity tests are insane in marginal states. I'm talking about both parties.
In marginal states, right.
Yeah.
I don't care again. Wyoming, Alabama, Idaho, have at it. But boy, I tell you, the hatred for Larry Hogan, I just wrote an article mentioning he might run. And it was like I'd written about Adolf Hitler. And I'm like, okay, first of all, the guy is a Republican. You may not agree with him on every issue, but he's probably more conservative than Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema.
Yep.
And he may not win for Senate, but he's won twice in a deep blue state as governor. So, and if he won,
and he's
a vote against Biden.
And look, he's governed about as conservatively in Maryland as you're ever going to get in Maryland. I mean, this was the whole thing with Mike Castle in Delaware. Remember, that's why we got Christine O'Donnell, is because she challenged him in the primary because he wasn't Tea Party. And that's great if you can win a general election. If not, then really, honestly, you should back off. And
I prefer to win. I mean, Mike DeWine and the guy in Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, these guys are more liberal than most Republicans I like, but they also win in blue and purple states.
Yep. Yeah, you have to nominate that was William F. Buckley's thing. Nominate
Correct.
the most conservative candidate who can actually win. Because it
that
doesn't
was the
do
rule
any
back
good.
in 2016, and that's why people didn't want Trump. And I admit I didn't think Trump was going to win.
I didn't either.
But if I had known he was going to win, then I'd say, who cares if he's a populist and a big government guy? So
beats Hillary Clinton.
Right. So in essence, Ed, I'll just for our listeners, the Republicans need to hold all their states, which is going to be tough to do, but that would include Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina. Going to be tough. But if they hold all those, they just got to pick up one seat, and that could happen in Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, or New Hampshire.
I agree.
Probably in that order.
I agree. Well, we're going to leave it there because we've actually exhausted AJ's list, but AJ is going to be coming back regularly here on the newly revamped Ed Morrissey show for the podcasts. And AJ, I want to thank you so much. It's always great talking to you. Happy New Year to you. And let's look forward to a lot of these conversations in 2022.
Oh, yeah. I look forward to it, Ed. Thank you.